GM. Welcome to another episode of Web3 Academy, your one trusted source to capitalize on the next big phase of the internet. Don't get caught in the hype cycle. I'm Jaybird, and I believe that the ERC-Cool smart contract standard is going to change the world. That's why I'm carving a path for doers to confidently build and invest in Web3. Now, you might have noticed that was a bit of a mouthful that I gave you there, the ERC-Cool smart contract standard. What the heck is that? Well, today we have three incredible guests joining us to talk about how we can use blockchain for good, specifically to impact climate change in a positive way. We have with us Stefan from Polygon Labs. He's the head of sustainability there. We have Ben, one of the founders of Book.io, and we have Leanne, the founder of Cool. Now, these three stakeholders came together recently for a partnership where you can buy a NFT book on Book.io. The book is called Climate Optimism. And when you buy that book, there is carbon removed automatically with your purchase. You don't have to click a button. You don't opt in. You don't do anything. This all happens automatically, and it all happens on chain, which means you can track it, you can trust it, you can see that it is legitimate and it happened, and you can see the impact that you've made and feel really good about it. This is an incredible innovation because it's simple in its nature. We're just talking about buying a book, super simple, buying a digital book. People do that all the time. That's nothing new. But when you take that book and you make it an NFT and you put it on chain, there's lots of benefits to that we're going to talk about. But what else can happen is in the background, you can use the ERC-Cool smart contract and you can remove carbon automatically. This episode is really inspirational. The type of episode I love to see where we bring together three incredible leaders in the Web3 space who are all really focused on not just building great products and trying to build a sustainable business. They also want to do it by having a positive impact at the same time. They want to make the world a better place, and they don't want to burn the world down while they're building their products, which really is the unfortunate situation that we're in right now with our current world. And we need more leaders that are focused on positive impact. And it's really incredible to see how simple that can be when you use on-chain, when you sell products on-chain in this Web3 way. It just flips what is possible and changes efficiencies and solves a lot of problems that a lot of brands face when they're trying to do good, and a lot of users face when they're trying to understand the good that is being done for them by a brand. Just so exciting to see Stefan, Leanne, and Ben work together, come together, and sell this book and make an positive impact on climate. And this is just the start. There is so much more that's going to come down the road. So super excited for you all to listen to this episode. Before we jump in, just want to make sure if you're not subscribed to our newsletter, you're going to want to subscribe. This is our newsletter we send out 3 days a week that gets you everything you need to know to stay on top of Web3. Our podcast very much focuses on the larger picture, but the newsletter is it's the daily in your inbox, everything you need to feel confident in this space, to learn, to stay on top of things. In only 5 minutes, it's going to take you to read the newsletter. So click the link in the show notes. If you're not already subscribed to our newsletter, make sure you subscribe. Let's take a minute to hear from our sponsor before we jump in to today's episode. Modern newsletters are built on Paragraph. That's right. Paragraph is a brand new newsletter platform that combines the best parts of Web 2 and Web 3 to supercharge newsletters for both writers and readers. Build a community, not just an audience. Paragraph uses blockchain tech to allow readers to collect and own the words that matter to them. This takes reading a newsletter to the next level. With Paragraph, readers can mint, collect, and show off quotes from their favorite newsletters. This opens new possibilities like creators sharing revenue with fans. I also love their new feature, Paragraph AI. This integrates GPT-4 natively in Paragraph to create, edit, and improve your writing effortlessly with one click. And guess what? We at Web3 Academy are on board and have already moved our content over to Paragraph. We believe this is the future of newsletters because of the profound engagement it creates between creators and fans. So, whether you're a creator, writer, or an avid reader, it's time to check out Paragraph and capitalize on the opportunity of being early. GM, welcome to another episode of Web3 Academy. This is an exciting episode. This is an episode with 3 guests. Doesn't happen often enough. And it's very interesting to have these 3 guests because this is a great example of what is possible on-chain with different partners. Today we have a blockchain in Polygon Labs. We have a smart contract layer in ERC-Cool. And then we have an app layer in Book.io, which really represents, we talk a lot about layers in blockchain, layer 1, layer 2. That's not the layers I'm talking about here. Here, this represents the different layers that we experience day to day when we are using on-chain apps. And we haven't really done an episode like this. So really excited. Welcome to the show, Leanne, Ben, and Stefan. Great to have you all.
Thanks for having us.
Yeah, it's good to be here.
Hey, everyone. Okay, we're going to get into each of you and what you're each doing, but I want to start off at the top because you all recently partnered on a book launch, and it launched in end of October. You can buy a digital book, and as a result of that, you can remove CO2. That is just an incredible accomplishment and something that really uses on-chain in a new way that we haven't seen before. I don't know, Leanne, Ben, one of you want to just start off by telling us a bit about the background on this partnership?
I actually think it started with Polygon Labs. I think Polygon Labs had hit us up and said, hey, we have this really cool smart contract layer with ERC-Cool and kind of wondered if you guys are interested. And I was like, well, yeah, we're super interested, right? Like mostly in publishing, where the publishing world has been known to like chop down trees for the last 400 years, right? The question mostly in publishing has always been like, how do we curb this a little bit? And also, for us, it's also the digital book ownership. So it was a very cool partnership, and we were just like, yeah, let's do it. So I got together with these two a couple of times, and we started just putting it together. So it's always really interesting on who you meet in Web3, and then when you come together and start sharing ideas, how exciting it can get very, very quickly.
Yeah, and I'll add to that from our perspective, obviously, Polygon Labs was, they were the matchmaker here. This Stefan is our Cupid, if you will. But, for us, really what we wanted to do is show that you could put climate action into everyday things, right? That our whole ethos is we want our lifestyles to be able to help support good things as opposed to feeling bad about them and having them feeling like they're part of the problem. They need to be part of the solution. So it felt like this first use case was perfect, like reading a book. And obviously what the guys at Book.io are doing around book ownership is already frontier and already pioneering, but then to program these books with carbon removal sort of just took it to that next level. So it felt like the perfect place to get going and show the world what's possible.
And Ben, can you just explain from a user experience perspective? So what is somebody going through? They're going to Book.io, they're buying this book. What's the process? Just so a user can understand how they would purchase a book and then as a result of that, have carbon removed.
Yeah, it's not super difficult, right? Like we're obviously aimed at like mass adoption. There's over 1.1 billion digital readers in the world, right? And we really want to like make sure that process is as seamless as possible, just as if you were going to any Web 2 service to buy a book, right? So once you hit Book.io, you could purchase Climate Optimism, which is the book that we chose for this one. You could use Matic or your credit card, right? So you can either use your own wallet, or we create that bookshelf for you on the back end as what we call a self-driven wallet. So you could take that bookshelf with you anytime you want. So, and then it was just, our tech team working with ERC-Cool and their team to make sure that smart contract actually did what it said, right? So again, I think what Leanne said was really perfect is let's have social impact in like the everyday items that we have. And the end user doesn't really have to know that, right? And so, but they can also see it in a trustless manner using the chain to identify that, like, what we said we were going to do, we actually did. And so, it's a really easy, simple process. Polygon obviously is lightning fast. So you buy that book and you get that book a couple seconds later, right? We can dive into the unit economics of why Polygon. It's a very fast chain. We can deliver things for pennies, right? And then again, in the publishing world, there's always a split. Normally it's 70-30. 70 goes back to the publisher. So that 30% allows us a wide margin to invest in social impact. And then the secondary royalty can continue to give back forever and ever. So awesome, again, awesome first use case when we're talking about like millions and millions of book titles that we're trying to get.
Yeah, it's amazing. I purchased the book in prep for this show, and I must say, purchasing an NFT using a credit card that is the future. It's so exciting when I see any app that is abstracting blockchain and enabling the purchase in such an easy way. So loved to see that. It was great. Very exciting to use my credit card and not have to use my Matic. I like to hold my Matic. It's doing well right now. So that was really great. And then also obviously the choice of a book that focuses on climate change makes a ton of sense. Cupid, Stefan, I want to go over to you here quickly. So tell us from your end, how did you make this partnership? And maybe that might actually lead a little bit into your role at Polygon. You might want to give us a little bit of context there because I think that'll help explain why you set up Leanne and Ben.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, maybe starting with that, some context. So I lead sustainability at Polygon Labs. That started out as something quite straightforward, which was, how do we ensure and communicate that blockchain as a whole, using different consensus mechanisms, can be sustainable and is maybe even more efficient than existing standards for how we transact in today's economy. And so with that said, that's how the role began. And it kind of evolved into, well, actually, maybe there's some really great applications for blockchain to improve how we actually scale impact. We're in dire need of accelerating things like climate finance. We need to see a more inclusive economy. And it turns out that not only is blockchain a more sustainable method to transacting in this economy, it can actually help other industries evolve and essentially allow us to reach our goals that we're looking to achieve by 2050. And so that's part of my role now is really spending a lot of time with organizations and identifying, what use cases make sense and which ones can scale quickly. And which ones are fun and engaging too, right? Because we have to get people involved, and the topic can sometimes be a little bit cringy to people. So we have to figure out, new ways of getting people engaged. And Leanne and I have had many conversations for a good period of time now. I consider us friends at this point. And we've just been talking about, what use cases make sense and how can we integrate ERC-Cool into everyday products. And it was actually a colleague of mine that had suggested, speaking to Book.io, and we got in a conversation and everyone was on board pretty much from the first moment. And that's kind of how things began. And that's always a win for me. That's what we're looking to do. Everything from, consumer products through to corporate supply chains. I think there's so many applications that you can utilize for blockchain. The best way to see it is, global coordination tools from everyone from the end user, all the way down to the original developer or manufacturer.
Well, I'm glad that you made this connection because it's great to see partnerships like this happening. We've mentioned ERC-Cool a few times, but we haven't yet explained it. So Leanne, I want to go over to you. Let's talk about on your end, when somebody buys this book, how does programmed carbon removal happen? How does that work?
Yeah. So really what it is without trying to get too technical, but kind of take people through the journey, is what it is a smart contract interface. So what this means is a piece of code that can actually plug into any smart contract. For this example, obviously it's Book.io's smart contract that is behind the book Climate Optimism. What the interface does is act similar to a royalty. So what it does is actually directs funds. So Book.io inherit this interface. They plug in the percentage of carbon removal that they want to do. That we call this technically a cool down rate. So they can choose, 0.5%, 10%, 100%. But what it will do is as that transacts, what that does then is flows the funds. That hits our delegate smart contract, and from there it splits it out. At this stage, what we're doing is what ERC-Cool is really all about is actually pushing forward the nascent kind of end of the spectrum of carbon removal, which are these engineered-based solutions, right? So we're not talking about nature-based solutions, which is often what's focused on. So these things are like direct air capture. There's solutions called biochar, mineralization. I'm happy to go into these too because they are complex themselves. But what happens is that this is a very expensive end of the voluntary carbon market. These tons of carbon cost a lot more than, say, planting a tree. But what they are is really permanent solutions, and they also need scaling. So what happens is these kinds of get left on the shelf. So ERC-Cool comes in hopefully to kind of push that market forward. That's what we want to do. And at this stage, that carbon is not yet on chain, right? It will be coming. There are people working on solving that problem right now. But what we actually have to do is that delegate smart contract then pings out via an API to purchase that carbon off chain. So at this point, we go off. We purchase the carbon to the amount of money that was supplied to us through the delegate smart contract. And then what we do is tokenize that impact. So say this book removed, I think it's like 2.14 kgs of carbon, each book will do. We then tokenize that as what we call cool factor. One cool factor equals 1 kg of carbon removed. So you'll get 2.14 cool factor back in your wallet as the end consumer. And the reason to do that is close this loop, right? Because often if you're thinking about a traditional kind of e-commerce solution today or experience today for a consumer, what we see is like these little tags that go, it's sustainable. And I go, cool, because I really want to buy that. I want to do that. But when I click that, I go, I have no idea what actually happened then. I've got from every end of the spectrum that could possibly just be a complete lie. I wouldn't have a clue. To I really hope they're doing it. But what we have to have is trust. And I don't think that should be part of the equation. I think we're now in a world that we actually don't have to have trust here. We can actually program these things. This is where blockchain comes in and solves that problem. So basically, this delegate smart contract is the thing that automates the purchase. We then tokenize that and close the loop for the consumer at the end.
It's amazing. You mentioned several words there that get me excited and that we talk a lot about on the show. Trust, or how blockchain is, trustless. Trustless is a difficult word to wrap your head around, but it means that, it is guaranteed trust. You don't have to worry about it. It's going to happen as it's said. You talked about automatic transactions as a result of, I purchased this book the other day. I believe it was 20matic or about $17. And I don't have to do anything. I just know that in the back end, as a result of that, I removed 2.5 kgs of carbon. I'm not a carbon removal expert, so I'm not exactly sure what 2.5 kgs of carbon is, but sounds great. I just know that it happens, and it happens automatically. We talk a lot about embedded transactions, that is happening in the background. You don't necessarily know that. And that's very different than the Web 2 way of doing things. And then you also mentioned this transparency of the cool factor token gets that transparency so the user knows and can see the impact that they're making. And I know you can even go to your website and put in your wallet and connect your wallet and see how much carbon you've removed as a result of whatever actions you've taken on chain. This is very different than we do things in the Web 2 world. I think we've all probably purchased a plane ticket and maybe purchased a little bit of carbon offsetting, or in some way, I feel like we have opportunities as users to do carbon removal. But when you click that button, as you said, it might say it's doing something, but you don't know what it's doing. You don't know who's involved. You don't know what the fees are. You don't even know how much of my money went to the end user. What is different, or how is this different on chain than it is in the Web 2 world? And what is really exciting for you at ERC-Cool and the way you're building this?
Yeah, it's interesting, right? Like that classic kind of experience that you laid out then was really what got me going on this, right? So what started my climate journey was becoming a mother. And I knew that one day my son would ask me during this kind of crucial decade, if you knew about this, why the hell weren't you doing anything about it? So I was like, oh my God, I've got to do something about it. But I started like everyone else. I started going through trying to do those little things in our everyday lives. You click that button and you go, I'm just not sure what happens. And then the bad thing is when you dig into it, there is a lot extra going on that's not actually happening, right? There are a lot of people that are just greenwashing, if you will. And it's not really that, it isn't that efficient. But what happens is that puts in doubt, and then that makes people inactive because we're like, if I think that offset button that you go through when you buy a flight, there's a stat out there that 1% of people will do that, right? Because we just don't trust it. But we also go, I mean, it's 50 cents. Can't you just hide that in the ticket price? And I'd pay the ticket price happily and you can call it carbon neutral. If you're really committed to this, you would do this as a company. And so I think that's a problem that I really wanted to solve. And at the same time, this was when really Web3 was exploding in my mind. And it really, like, I'm pretty cliche, but it came along with the NFT kind of boom. But Stefan touched on this before. What that showed us is that how you could coordinate a movement, essentially. Like, even if you look at Bored Ape, that is a coordinated movement of internet strangers to become rich and wealthy. Like, that they knew what they were doing and they did it really well when you think about how they executed that. And that's when I saw this and I knew there was a better way possible. I knew that we could actually start to program over promise and actually then give that radically transparent experience and give back to the consumer something that is down to the gram, exactly what you've just done. Whether 2.14 kgs or whatever it be, you don't even have to know that's my one coffee or whatever that is. It doesn't matter. You've got something now tangible to go, okay, I know what I did at least. And then we can actually open up to have fun with that token too, right? So we can actually kind of change the way we look at climate action into something that's quite a chore and this kind of burden and responsibility into something that's actually quite pleasure enhancing. I'm going about my life. I'm having a positive impact. I can have fun with that. This is a better way for me to approach this problem, I think.
Stefan, on your end, you mentioned, your job sounds incredible, by the way, that you speak to organizations and help them try to understand how to use blockchain for sustainability. So deep bow and respect to you for doing that. I wish more people were doing that. I'm curious, this concept of like embedded, I don't know what the word is, embedded transactions, is that a concept? What are the concepts that you find yourself explaining to these corporations in the way that the models that they need to understand in order to see how blockchain can be used to improve sustainability?
That's a huge question. Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of layers to it. I think something Leanne was touching on is really critical to think about, and even you touched on it yourself. In these flight transactions, right, it's purely a voluntary action for you to decide to offset your carbon footprint related to your air travel, for example. The same goes for these entities, these corporations. There is some level of compliance when it comes to meeting sustainability targets, but a large portion of what happens today is completely voluntary. And unfortunately, the people who are acting voluntarily in this regard are generally actually being vilified or receiving the most backlash in relation to this, right? So as an example, The Guardian released an article a couple of months ago that came out and said, 90+% of the carbon credits that people are purchasing and retiring, airlines, they name a number of companies, are ineffective or not achieving what they're setting out to do. And the danger that has is these sustainability teams, in tying with their marketing and other teams in these organizations, suddenly step back and say, okay, we have to be really careful about how we engage with these markets. And often that leads them to a complete standstill where they freeze and they don't take any action, or they reduce the action that they're taking because of how that's generally received. So with tools like this, right, it brings that transparency, and it's key to build trust. Like, we can talk about trustless, but you have to get to that state of trust first. So, when someone's doing this transaction, they also need to be able to go and verify that that's occurring, right? And you can do that now. And Leanne talked about how we're really at a version 0 of this, where in the future we'll be bringing all of these pieces on chain. And that's key for the future of this entire climate finance movement. It's not just about the end user and the corporation. You can also tie, all the way back to the project developer, the person that's saying, hey, we're removing this amount of carbon. It doesn't need to be a statement made by them. It can be a statement that is proven with remote sense data, high resolution satellites, that is then delivered directly to the blockchain and proves the statement they're making without anyone able to interact with that data and manipulate the information. So we can really get to a state of trust that can actually almost guarantee that these activities are occurring. And that's key for these organizations. They need to be able to prove these statements for their own benefit, in the market that we're in today. And this is a delicate industry and something that desperately needs support. And we're just trying to facilitate that with technology that brings that transparency and trust that's necessary.
I would love to jump in on this too, because like just yesterday I had this very conversation, right? Like talking to a very large publisher, and the first thing out of their mouth is like, isn't blockchain super dirty, right? And so because they read headlines and it's like, Bitcoin uses more energy than whatever Maine or whatever the latest headline is, right? So in the everyday American's mind, it's like there is one blockchain, like there's one internet, right? So it really gives us an opportunity to say like, no, here are the chains that we develop on. Here is Polygon, right? And here is their website. And like, they are very focused on carbon neutral, making sure that that chain is as clean as possible, right? And then it gives me an opportunity to say, but we can take another step, right? And we can actually remove carbon with every purchase, right? Again, a lot of times in Web3, there's a lot of companies that are they're building, but they don't really solve a problem. And now it's like, no, this is an immediate problem, right? So when you look at it through a publisher's mindset, right? Like if they wanted to do this, right? Like digital book ownership is cool. We're growing at a lightning pace. They have a lot of questions, right? But not only are we showing up with answers, we're coming in and we're saying, we can also do this. You just have to click this button. You just have to tell me what percentage do you want to go to carbon removal, right? Now, this is where it gets really, really interesting too, because now we're getting into a space where it can actually be way better than Web 2, right? Because if you were to buy on Kindle, that publisher, all they get in return is like, here's your data, like here's the number of people who bought and here's your check, right? But with us, it's like, here's all the people that own Climate Optimism, right? And now we know that these people are interested in this type of book and we can retarget them, right? And we can retarget them and say like, hey, this next book is going to be this percentage off because you own this book, right? Or then we can even go as far as going to ERC-Cool and their token and saying, we're going to airdrop everybody who has this amount of their token. We're going to airdrop this book, or we're going to airdrop something else, right? So it really does solve problems, but it opens up this merchandising cycle that did not exist before, like where the data stopped, where they didn't get any data at all, right? Where now we come in and be like, I couldn't lie to you about book sales if I wanted to. It's on the blockchain. And what's more is like, I can deliver to you all of this data to develop community of like-minded individuals who care about the environment, who want to learn about this. So it's like, it's really awesome that we've gotten to this period so quickly where it's like, now I can consume knowledge, I can resell my book, I can have a positive impact. And now I'm entering in and finding other like-minded individuals that I can grow in community with. All of that was impossible a year ago, right? So it's not even, comparing ourselves to Web 2. It's like, this is the next giant leap in innovation. It makes everything better, right? And it gives us so much data to people who didn't have it before. I mean, again, all the major publishers don't get any of this data, and it frustrates the hell out of them because as marketers, it's like, how are you making decisions if you don't have data? So when you compare it to Web 2, it's like, man, this will be the norm. It is inevitable because it is so much easier. And again, if I was to go to that publisher and like, I have this idea about carbon removal, it's like, no, man, like they're slow moving. And then we'd have to get so many legal teams involved. Instead, it's just like, click this button to get started. That is the path we have to develop these solutions to fix problems. And people, they're excited about it, right? They want to learn more. And again, it's great to have partners like Polygon, like ERC-Cool, so that we can go back and just say, if you want to learn more, here it is. But we can get started tomorrow. Business does not change at all. Like, we can sell your book starting tomorrow, right? It's that easy.
You mentioned so many things there, Ben. But first, I'm going to say, if you ever want a side hustle, you would be a great podcast host. Very, very well said. And, I'd love to bring you onto the show more often. So you let me know.
Hey, man, I have zero time, okay? I have zero extra time. I guarantee you everybody on this call works like 100 hours a week, right? It is fun, but in the Web3 world, right, if you're not building every day, you're dying, right? Yeah. And so mostly in the bear market, right, like everybody says, it's like, I think this is the interesting thing is utility, when you look at the last year, is what is winning, right? All the hype and all that stuff, you can't continue to be the cool kid forever, right? It's impossible, right? But utility lasts forever, right? And again, like what we talk about is utility today and then maybe added utility tomorrow. Like a book might have certain utility that we promised today, but it might be something else tomorrow, right? Like it might give you access to something else tomorrow. So it's an endless amount of merchandising. And again, this is a super cool way to look at the world. And once you get it into your brain, right? Like, hey, you don't own your digital books, right? your Kindle shelf doesn't have any value. The second you hear that, right, you can't unhear it. And it's really crazy to watch, like the way people in their minds it works, where they finally get to the point where it's like, I should own the stuff I buy. As a pretty foundational thing. And again, it's like we kind of covered some of these things really quickly, which is even when I look at like what Polygon Labs is doing and like these partnerships, like it really does come into like unit economics, right? Like if it, for example, some of the tech that we're building, if I want to go give away 50,000 units of books, right? It's like, that's depending on what chain you use, that could get super, super expensive, right? So that's why it is important to know some of these chains. And for the listeners out there who are interested in Web3, you have to know these things because you have to look at it as like transactions. Like how much does it take for you to move a digital good from here to there, right? Is it pennies or is it $40 in gas fees on ETH, right? Like people aren't going to buy books if it costs them $40 to move them around.
Well, and everybody that's active right now, I'm sure, is seeing gas fees are increasing. This past month, gas fees are back on the rise. We've had a nice bear market of low gas fees for a while now. And all of a sudden, yesterday I went to do a transaction. I was like, are you kidding me? That's the gas fee? Like, no way. Yeah. Now I was doing it on Ethereum. So like, right. Obviously it's gone a high gas fee. I wasn't doing it on Polygon. I wish I could have done it on Polygon, but I couldn't. But so there's a lot of scaling solutions. And you mentioned before, and I just want to go back quickly because my two favorite myths in the space are that crypto is bad for the environment. Proof of stake blockchains like Polygon use 85,000 times less energy than the traditional banking system uses. So don't even, that is a dead, yes, proof of work in Bitcoin does use a lot of energy, but most of those miners are trying to do it in renewable ways and they don't get enough credit for that. And then the second is that crypto is all for terrorism and for malicious acting. And there's been multiple studies that have shown that's less than 1% of blockchain usage is used for that reason. I can't even imagine how much is used in traditional banking as well. So those myths need to disappear. But as you said, Ben, the media loves those headlines. So they're going to continue to do that. Ben, I want to come back quickly to you. For this book and this partnership, can you just explain who's taking less of a cut and putting that cut towards the carbon removal? Is that coming from the user? Is that coming from the publisher? Is it coming from your end? And is that a decision that who makes that decision? Like, what is the exact setup?
It's actually a fun story because I think we're about a week out and my CTO was like, hey, whose cut is this coming out of? And I was like, oh man, I didn't even think of that, right? So it definitely came out of Book.io's end, right? But again, it's like we have healthy margins, right? And we have an endless amount of supply. Like there's always going to be new books, right? And I think this is when you compare, unfairly to other NFT projects, mostly like PFP projects, it's like, there's usually 5 or 10,000 units. For us, it's like, man, we're trying to ingest like 20 million titles next year, right? So like there isn't, in our use case, billions of NFTs in the future, right? Like to the point where this is why it is important to have conversations with like-minded individuals in Web3, even at, the L2s because we're going to run into a scalability issue at some point, right? All that to being said is, this allows us to do that, right? And even again, once that individual has that unit, right, that book, and they decide to resell it, right, then it can trigger that smart contract. So even if I decided to give away, 100,000 books, right, because that's what we chose to do, because we want people to understand the chain. We want people to have an opportunity to see that like blockchain is not bad, right? Then once they sell those books, then it can trigger that smart contract. So there's so many different ways that you can cut it, right? And again, it's like, that's just a portion of what we did. We could have done more. We could have put more back to something else. We could have split up that smart contract 100 different ways, right? So the publisher gets paid every time the book sells, and we put some towards carbon removal also. So in this case, it was out of Book.io's end. I don't think we have a problem with that moving forward, even at like a grand scale. Our conversations now are not only in the digital world, but also in the print world, also in the bundling world of as books are moving off of like the print on demand line, are we going to stamp them with carbon removal as they come off, right? And do it at a much larger scale because, digital, right? Like if I'm moving a book around on Polygon, it doesn't have the carbon footprint of a book that is printed, is shipped, is, delivered, that has a much larger carbon footprint. So when you talk about competing at the very highest levels against the Amazons of the world, you have to have a sustainable competitive advantage. Ours just happens to be that we want to be sustainable. We want the world to be sustainable. We want to work. And again, publishers are very interested in this idea because they've just never had it before. And to implement something like that at a grand scale at some of these large publishing houses would take years, right? They need solutions that they can come in and just sign, and it doesn't affect revenue at all. It actually increases revenue because it builds community and gives them more data.
Yeah, well said. Leanne, I want to go over to you. So I really want people to understand how simple and easy it is to integrate the ERC-Cool smart contract standard. And I want people to understand how, I think one thing with 3 stakeholders on this show, Polygon providing the blockchain and the consensus layer, and then you're providing the smart contract, and then Ben is providing the app layer to sell the book. It can get very easy to, everyone understands the app layer. I think we all can grasp that. But the blockchain and smart contract layer can get a bit confusing. Can you try to explain sort of your role in this partnership, and then maybe use that to explain how others could use ERC-Cool as well?
Yeah, for sure. So like we said before, that we've created this interface. This is actually open source code, right? So the idea was to make this permissionless too, right? As in, you don't even need like what we need in web. If we would do this in Web 2, if we take that back to what we were trying to achieve before, you would need to integrate. You would need someone to come in. You would need teams to talk to one another. But we have these standard smart contracts. And so what we've developed is this interface that can plug into any one of those standard smart contracts. And they can do that. They can be done without even a conversation. It can be done without asking us permission. You can simply go and pick it up off the GitHub and inherit it like that. You still have to have a developer. You still have to be developing a smart contract. You can't be using one that is, I guess, off the shelf from somewhere else. So there are some nuances to that, right? You still have to have, for example, the CTO from Book.io had to go in there, and he actually did have some questions, because this was sort of the first time of implementing it. There were some questions around it that we worked to make simpler. But the thing is that 1, it's open source, 2, it's permissionless. No, that doesn't mean everyone's going to come in and use it because, just because you build something, they don't find it. So the challenge is really to make sure that you still make this super easy, right? Like, how do we then put this into places where we talk about creators that listen to this show are not necessarily developers. I'm not a coder. If I want to create an NFT, I have to go to a launchpad to do that. And that means using someone else's kind of preset smart contract. And so what we want to do is actually weave ERC-Cool into these places. So it's a choice. When you're a creator and you're creating any NFT, we want that to be a choice that's given. Just like you get the choice of, do you want the 721 or an 1155 smart contract? You should actually be able to choose, do you want this to be made cool effectively? So we're working in the background to try and get things like launchpads interested. But obviously, that's at working with other application layers essentially. And that, it's a challenge, right? To make people go, because again, they go, well, blockchain's not so bad anymore. We're not the Ethereum of the past. But that really isn't the point. The point is that 1, consumers want this. They want you to take a stance here and they want you to lead. If you do so, that's really good for your business. But 2, we're actually about trying to regenerate. We're actually going to a space where we're not just trying to go, well, we're not so bad, so it's okay. It's like, we actually can do this. And if we do a little bit at scale, imagine the positive impact we can have and the kind of good we can do. And I think Ben's, what he said, he's talking about billions of NFTs. He only has to put 0.1% on that into carbon removal. And we're talking one of the biggest impacts anyone's ever had in this space. So it's that simple. Like, it really isn't that hard to create massive change. And that's what I think hopefully people's eyes start to see. Like, we don't even have to be that hardcore on it. Just slight intention here and programming it in can have massive, massive impact, which is super powerful.
Stefan, on your end, I'm really curious to know what a day in the life of Stefan is like. I could wrap my head around the founder's job over here in both Leanne and Ben, but what is the head of sustainability for Polygon's day look like? And, can you bring that back to maybe conversations that you have that, I don't know if I'm sure you have conversations about all types of sustainability, not just carbon removal, But if you can tie that back at all to this conversation.
Yeah, I mean, to kind of reiterate on your own point there, we're still fighting that fight around blockchain sustainability, right? I think luckily a lot of that conversation has quietened, or at least developed to the point where we're starting to look at, how do we standardize measurement? What do we classify as efficient? But it's really an innovative industry where, the example that I always try to give is, take Ethereum. Used to be proof of work, consensus mechanism, magnitudes larger in terms of its impact, negative externalities of the operation of that chain. And in less than 10 years, they've switched over to proof of stake, and they've reduced their environmental impact, their energy consumption, their carbon footprint by more than 99.9% in that space of time, right? We're talking about leading innovators that are coming together and aren't pushing away the challenge. You look at any blockchain, it doesn't just have to be Polygon Network, it can be Solana, Hedera, you name it. They're involved in this effort. We're all in working groups together. We're all looking at how to really push that message forward positively to seek adoption, because we do see so much more than the negative impact of the blockchain. What we see is something that is such an efficient technology that can actually be net positive. And when it's interweaved into the economy, we start to develop the type of economy we need to see to really regenerate nature and live in a healthier world. So that takes up a large portion of my time, is really engaging with policymakers, regulators, other blockchains. It's a very collaborative field, or vertical within sustainability is, it's not a competitive landscape in the same way. So we're all trying to achieve the same thing. And then, on top of that, it's really trying to support applications to get adopted, because that's really where we're at right now. We can continue to look at, how we make our networks more efficient, but we also have to look at how do we make the rest of the world run better in this regard. And so I think my time is kind of evenly split between those two. So those two key territories is where I spend most of my time. But in terms of applications, like tying it back to this, like I said, this is really just the beginning for what we see as possible. And like Leanne was talking about before, when that carbon removal comes on chain as well, it's not just about the trust and transparency. It's maybe not in the case of the tech-based carbon removal, but when we're talking about nature-based carbon removal or nature-based protection, there are communities that do not see their fair contribution in terms of economics in that supply chain. And that's something we can change, because let's take a project developer for carbon sequestration. You're looking at, tens, if not hundreds of thousands of dollars plus a year plus to essentially get that project certified so that your Delta or another airline or company can buy that credit to account for some emissions. With this, I just spoke to a protocol 2 weeks ago. They have a tool that can essentially create what's classified as a baseline, which is what takes all this time, working out what is the base before additionality occurs, where we're sequestering additional carbon into the ground, let's say into the soil. And this can create the baseline in just a few minutes. Essentially, all it takes to process a few transactions and process data and essentially record it on chain. And that's the baseline created. The economic cost, the time, everything just opens up this market to an entirely new group of people where, a single farmer can engage in this market rather than having to be some conglomerate or large project developer. And that's really what we're looking to do is transform this from, what's currently really a top-down market into something that's bottom-up and can get everyone involved. And it can be an inclusive economy.
And as Ben said, users want this. The community there's so many people out there that are looking to find like-minded people that also care about this. They want to be a part of this. And carbon removal in particular it's a very inefficient market. It's very difficult to access it directly as a user, which causes a lot of issues. Maybe we can go over, Leanne, why are we struggling so much to address climate change? Like, we all talk about it. We all know it. It is so important. I think everybody on this call and everybody listening, I'm sure, cares. What's the holdup?
Yeah, that is a absolute bird's nest of a question, because I think there's a number of things going on here, right? But if we kind of want to bring it down to what we're talking today, it's definitely not intent, right? Like, there's stats everywhere. And I think the latest one I've read is that 97% of people want a more sustainable life. They want to live a more sustainable life. The thing is, though, that they really, and actually Stefan sent this really interesting report to me the other day, saying that later is too late. But really what it digs into is like, what's the narrative holding us back? If people are saying they're motivated, they want to do it, Why are we not connecting the dots here? What's the gap? And it really comes into, there's a few things, but a lot of it comes to do with they want brands and governments to take that responsibility. There's been a lot of sort of propaganda that the individuals are the ones responsible, right? But really that we know that, look, we're pushing up against the stream. If individuals are really the ones to take this on their shoulders, yes, we can do things, right? And people want to do things, but we have to enable that. So they want to be enabled. That means that brands, like perfect example is Bukeo, they come in here and they go, look, we're going to do it. We're going to put it in our products. All you have to do is buy from us. You want this anyway. You get a choice of who you buy this from. If you buy it from us, that box is ticked, that's done. The other thing I think we have to do is take trust out of the equation, right? So there's also a wealth of stats that basically say that people just don't trust it. They don't, I think, say 14% of people believe that when they see that sustainability sign, something's actually happening behind it. Not that they can articulate what that is, but there's a whole heap of people out there that go, yeah, I'm not so sure if that happens. And I'm one of them. And no one has the time to dig in to actually go and find out, is this brand actually standing up behind this? What are they doing? To what extent? So we just sort of need to really try and remove that. This is obviously where blockchain really comes in. And then I think the other kind of interesting thing is around the narrative and the messaging. People are motivated, but they're not so motivated by the ways that we've been kind of communicating this so far. You know, we've really been coming to this with the stick, not the carrot. You know, what is often presented to us is this fiery future, which is actually kind of, one, terrifying, and two, hard to kind of figure it out, right? Look, what does that even really look like, with millions of people displaced and all the rest of it? But what this, actually, that Stefan sent me the other day, was overwhelming, is that people want to protect what they love, and they want to make sure that the future or the next generation actually has the good things that we have. You know, we want to be making sure that we're reminded of what we're fighting for is actually the things that we already love, the things that we want to remain, the things that we want to keep here, and make sure that they actually, you know, stay there for the future generations. So it's more around, I think, making it something that you go, okay, I know I love doing this thing, and if the world goes to the place that they're saying it can go to, we could lose this. We can't lose that. We can't lose this biodiversity. We can't lose all the things that make life at the end of the day. So communication around that kind of way. And the other thing for me, I think, is branding. Like, when you look at the world, branding is a powerful tool, and it's not used in this space. There isn't one brand that you can go to that go, oh, they're nailing it with this. And I think that's a massive gap. You know, the brands that we have to turn to in a sustainability space are really other companies. Like, you look at Tesla's a car company, car manufacturer. Patagonia makes, outdoor clothing. These are the brands that we hold up at the moment. And there's nothing wrong with that. Like, they are very good at what they do because they've nailed it. They've also asked no one to kind of sacrifice on style or how good the car is. You know, if Tesla wasn't as fast as and as sleek and as good a design as it was, just because it was electric wouldn't make it different, wouldn't make it good. It's good because it's designed well. It's, just as competitive as any other car. And again, this is where I then come back to Trade Core, and what we're trying to do is going, you want that brand, you want that t-shirt, let's make that thing sustainable, as opposed to having to choose a sacrifice and go for a different brand that you don't like as much, but you're trying to make a good decision. So if we can kind of put these things into places where people already are, paint a picture of, we're doing this because we're trying to protect what we love, and kind of just come at it with no need for trust, all the rest of it. Well, I guess like Stefan said, there is a need for trust, but the fact that it's radically transparent, you can see what's happening, I think that really does change it. There is a good chance that we can actually get people motivated and get more people involved. And again, it's about these micro actions at scale. If we can get billions of these things happening all over the place, all of the time, through everyone's day, that actually will add up to this massive impact and really getting that kind of consumer-powered climate action into full force, I think.
I'll jump in there too, because just like more real-world type discussions, right? Like when we first got in, I started talking to like the major publishing houses, like 2 of the big 5 actually have in their corporate documents that they will not use proof of work, right? And I was blown away that they were even that forward thinking. I was like, wow, I didn't think you guys were thinking about this at all, right? So there was that portion of it, right? But the other thing is, when you talk about brands, it's like she's talking about motivation. Like, I think there is a motivation there. It's also a question of capacity. How much time do you have to throw at this? Like Stefan's talking about, like, how much money do you have to throw at this? So if you can reduce those things, then you can make it scalable, right? So again, when we show up and we say, like, you can be a part of this, you just have to check this box. It's like, it's really developed. It's a solution to a problem. They know it. They want to be more green. They want to have more action. They just don't know how to do that, right? And so I think a lot of times it's the entrepreneurs, the people like on this call, the people who listen to this who are thinking like, how do I still solve real world problems, right? And also make an impact. Like we've talked about this a lot on other calls. It's like, it doesn't have to be this or that, right? Same thing in Web3. It doesn't have to be convenience or ownership. It can be both. For brands like Book.io, we believe it can be both. We believe we can have a positive impact. We can be a profitable company, and we can also have a positive impact. And a lot of that stuff is, people like Leanne coming to us and people like Stefan coming to us say, hey, this is pretty easy. And it's like, man, that is really easy. Like we did it once. There was the heavy lifting, right? And it wasn't very heavy, right? But now we can do it hundreds of millions of times or billions of times if we choose, right? And again, we can pass that along to the brands that we work with. So a lot of times I think it's just capacity. I mean, again, these huge corporations, they're moving forward super fast. They want to do these things. They just don't know how, and they need somebody to deliver those solutions to them.
Yeah, I'd love to answer that if that's okay. I just think there's so many key points that are hit on there, and just coming into the end of what you had to say, Ben, this is a capacity challenge, right? If we're talking about emissions, let's not even get it into a positive impact with something like this. Generally, like more than 70%, sometimes as much as 90% or more of emissions happen in the supply chain for an organization. Like Apple, I think 99% of their emissions are indirect. They're related to something in their supply chain. And that is incredibly hard to manage. That's a coordination problem right there. It's a monstrosity to try and deal with. That's why we're not even thinking about compliance or anything that's legally binding when it relates to Scope 3 emissions. And that's something where we can actually, manage that capacity by implementing blockchain. Like Ben said, we build this once, right? We build a tool that creates this coordination. We build it once for one example, and the pilot works functionally. Others can just use that same platform, right? They don't need to iterate and create a new version. It's very straightforward, and that's the direction we're heading, and that's how we manage things. Is if there isn't the capacity, let's make the capacity. Let's make things more efficient, and that's the way we think about things, internally at Polygon Labs as well. Is how do we make things more efficient, essentially, and I think that can apply to sustainability as well.
I think there's some virality to that ideology too, right? Because like even when we have our conversations, it's like we go to our partners and a lot of the ones who have supply chains, right? And now they're asking us the other questions is like, what if we use blockchain for our logistics? What if we use blockchain for inventory management? So it is a cascading type of disruption that we see, right? Is once they understand it, once they see the efficiency, once they see that what can be done, as entrepreneurs giving ideas to other entrepreneurs. And so that snowball starts to roll pretty fast, right? So it's just really interesting to see, like, even with the people that we work with when we talk about supply chain, right? Because again, when we go back to even capacity, right? COVID was a problem, right? And prices spiked everywhere, which means they have less capacity and the costs are going up. And it's where do you pass that cost on? Is it to the end user? Who's it going to go to, right? So I think a lot of the times the stuff that Polygon Labs is building, stuff that's like ERC-Cool is building, it does help, right? And it helps them jump into a conversation they wouldn't be able to jump into because it's so easy to get in, right? Again, if you're talking about, hey, we want to build our own blockchain and, and we want to have carbon offset, it's like, okay, well, I'll see you guys in $15 million in 4 years, right? Or it's like, hey, this is all at your fingertips and you can get started tomorrow. I think, again, when you start adding all those things up, and again, like-minded people who are listening to this, who are, how do we get involved? That's the really interesting thing about Web3 right now is it's probably smaller than people think. The real utility, the real projects building, the people who survived the bear market, right? And we talk a lot, right, of who's doing what and like what is really cool. Because again, these are all pointing to a better outcome and a better web experience, a better ownership experience than we had in Web 2. And we're democratizing both data and ownership in the meantime. And again, like Leanne said, like, I think the mindset, and maybe this is an American mindset of like, we got to do something big and we got to do it now. And it's like, I think she's right. It's like, no, what we need is like tiny little changes a couple trillion times. And then that becomes the norm. And then it's every brand does this. And if you don't do it, then what are you doing for your social impact?
just cut that, Leanne, and then just
I know.
send that out to every brand. And if
Drop
you
the
don't
mic.
do this, what are you doing? There you go. Done. Sales made. You guys have done a great job, Stefan. Ben, sort of wrapping up and pulling everything together here. Leanne, just want to see if you have any final thoughts before we wrap up.
No, other than come and buy a book. I think there are some still available. So come and see it working. This is it, right? Like, one of the things is it's hard when things are just in our minds. But what people do need is to get it in your hands. You need to feel this. And this is one way that it's now possible to do so. Like, you know, if you're a creator and you think this is interesting, but you're also not creating a smart contract just yet, it's not that magical time for you, this is a way to come and get it in your hands. And it's worth it. Like, you get a book, you get to own that book, you get that knowledge, plus also you're removing carbon. So yeah, I wanted to give a shout out and make sure people knew that they could come and do this still. Just hit book.io, I should say, and you'll find it there.
We'll have the link directly in the show notes for anyone that wants to purchase. I would agree, go purchase this book, because not only is it a great book that will teach you a lot about the state of climate change and where we're at and the optimism to come, but you'll also indirectly be supporting carbon removal all on chain, which is just fantastic to see. Stefan, Ben, want to go back to you guys one more time. Anything you want to ask from the audience, anything you want to say, and maybe just also mention where people could follow you online. And Leanne, I'll come back to you for that one as well.
I think the thing is if I was going to leave every listener with something, I think it's very positive. I think the things that are happening in the Web3 world they're just starting to roll. The utility of what people are building is just starting to come to fruition. I think people should own the things they buy, right? And I think we're starting to see that happening. Come be part of our community. Like, we've grown so rapidly. I think we have the ideological mindset of like, hey, I buy digital books, I should own them, I should be able to resell them, I should be able to give them away, I should be able to lend them out. Like, so come be part of our community. Jump onto our Twitter, just search book.io. And I think the interesting thing mostly with us too is our community is just very giving, right? When you have questions, they're like, hey, can I send you a book? Do you want to see this? Right? That's the only thing I would say is, like, I think there's a lot of, coming out of a bear market, there's so many people. It's the long crypto winter. A lot of people froze to death, right? And I would say, like, out of this, I think there's been so much utility built for the builders that kept building. The future is very bright. The future for books is extremely bright. For digital assets is bright. For social impact is bright. So I would say, like, jump in. Like, for the entrepreneurs out there, like, jump in, find your place, listen first, connect with people, and find your place in this revolution that is going to be worth trillions of dollars and really change the entire world.
Stefan?
Yeah, I mean, I guess I just like to second that. It really is a community where you start looking at everything and it's just overwhelming. There's so much. And before you know it, you've found your niche and you have a community that's there to support you. It's very collaborative. I think if I was to say anything, now is the time. Now is always the time, but now really is the time. I've seen a lot of maturing happen with a lot of products where now we're just starting to, measure how we can get these implemented, make sure that everything's functional. And, we are starting to see that engagement curve evolve for a lot of what would generally be skeptical organizations. And so, now is the time to start understanding this technology. If you're in the professional field, look at digital product passports, understand decentralized identity. There's so much to unpack. Of course, follow Polygon Labs. We'll have some exciting updates coming in the next couple of months around our own sustainability strategy, around some products that we want to highlight. So yeah, just jump in. Now is the time.
We could have you back on the show to have a whole conversation about decentralized identity as well. That's a big one that very exciting, but I won't go down that route.
I have to jump in because it's literally something that we talk about every day. And it's solving this problem mostly of like the unending ability of AI, right? And it's like when you look at the components of Web3, the blockchain as the trustless source, right? A source of trust of like who created this, it's going to be a big deal. And it's a very big deal within publishing and like where books are identified from. So yeah, I think you should do a whole show on it. And I'm too busy for it. Bring Stefan back.
And it's funny that you bring AI because AI is really accelerating the need for verified identity, and blockchain is just sitting there waiting as the solution. So it's obvious where it's going to go. I won't go further into the conversation right now. Leanne, any final thoughts or asks from the audience?
Yeah, for sure. I think what the two guys have really kind of raised is really does wrap it up nicely. What we see as a world is this is pretty inevitable too, right? Like I now kind of view that online will be on chain. And what I wanted to do was be there and have this ability to weave this in and program this in just kind of default. Like what Ben said, if you're not doing this, why not? Like there is no real good reason not to put this in. And I think, yeah, when you think about what we're doing right now, it's a special time, right? We're getting to shape the future. The foundations that we lay now through this bear market, whilst we're creating now, is actually going to create the future. And that's what pulled me in. Like what I want to say I've been doing during this decade is trying to get a foundation right, that when this goes and when this really does become to full adoption, it's done right. You know, we're coming into this next revolution. Every other revolution before us has actually been worse for our planet. This one is the chance to actually get it right and start getting in the right direction. And I wanted to be there when that happened. And if I could help make that happen, that's something that I want to sit back and say, yeah, I tried, at least tried. And I think then when we look at what we're doing, we've got every chance of doing this right. So get amongst is basically the message.
Couldn't have said it better myself. This is the revolution that's going to get it right. I believe that. I know all of us believe that. Thanks so much for everybody for listening in. Thank you much for all of you for joining us today. Thanks for all your work. I think, Ben, you said it best. The space is very small. Anybody listening, if you are interested in getting in touch with any of these three people, I'm sure they will gladly love to spend some time with you. Reach out to them. There's so much opportunity right now because we are still so small. You can really connect with anybody, and everybody wants to partner and support each other. It's a very collaborative space in Web3 right now, so don't hesitate. Thanks so much for listening in, everybody. Have a great day.
Thank you for listening to Web3 Academy, your one trusted source to capitalize on the next big phase of the internet. If you enjoyed this episode, please share it and subscribe or follow so that you don't miss the next one. While you're at it, there's a link in the description for our free newsletter where we provide timely and relevant Web3 insights so you can confidently build and invest in Web3. Make sure to subscribe today. One final note. This podcast is for educational purposes only, and nothing we say is financial advice. Crypto and Web3 are risky, and you should never invest more than you're willing to lose. Thank you, friends, and see you in the next one.